And welcome back as we go ahead and dive right into looking at how we can use methods to actually return an array. This, of course, can go both ways. You can also feed an array into a method. So we start looking at methods that can return an array as a value here. This is something that Java can do and handle very well because it's obviously just another thing that we return, just like we return, like for example, like a string, which is a class type. Remember that arrays also kind of have some of those similar behaviors. With arrays, though, you have to specify the return type for that method that returns an array in the same way that we return a type for an array parameter. So if we look at this with an example, you can see here we have a method that returns an array. So a public static char uppercase version, char a, char temp equals new char of a.length, int I for I equals 0, I is less than a.length, I plus plus, temp of I equals character.to uppercase, a of I, return temp. Now, what does return temp mean? That means we are creating a temporary array and we're returning the value out. If we wanted to use that to update the existing array, then we could use that. Or if we wanted to put it into a new array, we could do that as well. So let's look at the generalized syntax for returning an array. As we already mentioned, a method can return an array, and the details are basically the same as for a method that returns an object of a class type. So here you can see we have some kind of base type, the method name, a parameter list. We have a base type with a temp equals a new base type. You're just going to fill that in the array size, put some code to fill the temporary values, and then return whatever that temp is. Now, you don't necessarily have to make this a static method. In fact, you don't even have to necessarily make it a public method for it to function, because a lot of times some of these things might be things you only want to happen where another class or another program couldn't access it. And you actually don't need a local variable such as temp. You can actually have some creative coding that can go around it. Or you maybe want a different variable name as well. These are things, again, that you have some flexibility as a programmer. So let's look at this with another example to kind of help iterate how this works. In this example method, we're returning an array that increments the values by whatever the increment value is. So here we have an incremented array. We're feeding in an array called A, and we're also taking in another argument that is going to be whatever we want the increment to be. And again, you can see it's following the same basic syntax. We have int array temp equals new int of array.length. So it's setting it to the exact same size of whatever that original array was. We have int I, and we say for I is equal to 0, I is less than a.length, I plus plus. Take temp of I and set it equal to a of I plus the increment, and then just return the temp. Now, the last thing to kind of keep in mind here when we start dealing with this is the array name types. Whenever you need an array type name, whether it's for the type of an array variable declaration, the type of an array parameter, or the type for a method that returns the array, you must specify the type name in the same way. So for example, we say double array A equals new double 10. Notice both of these are double. If I say int, give int array, and then parentheses char array parameter, you'll notice that, again, these aren't the same, but this is feeding this in as something for this give int array. So very important to make sure you kind of keep those in mind. Most of the time, you're not going to see something probably like this second example, but you will a lot of times see this first one used quite frequently. Now, if we go ahead and take a look at this with an example again, here's our incremented array, and you can see I've created a quick demo program that has an array with the static values 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I have this r equals increment array, which means I'm going to take and increment it and store it back into the original array. If I want to put this into a new array, I'd have to create another array, and then I could say like int r2 equals incremented array. Then we could just have a for loop here that's just going to print that out, and of course this is the increment array method we saw previously. Array starts as 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, so if we give it a run, we now get the values 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that works pretty great. In fact, if I wanted to make this look a little more nicely formatted, I can make that into print statement. You can see we get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If I were to change this increment value, and so instead of being 1, if I change, let's say, to 5, and I rerun this program, you can see now I get 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, because all it's doing is adding 5 to whatever values I originally had here. If I wanted to make something similar, let's say like a program that would do the same thing, but now it's going to multiply the increment. If I made this like a multiply increment here, and I'm just going to run this, you can see now we get 0, 5, 10, 15, 20. So again, we can do anything here inside this method that we normally would want to do. You can see how we can start using arrays not only as parameters, but also as returns. The big thing to keep in mind here is when we say return temp, remember if I did not have this here, if I take this out and just have my code like this, it's not going to update properly, because if I run this, you'll see now I get back to 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, which is my original values. So if you're getting a behavior like this that's happening, it means that you forgot to set that return back into some value that you want to use.